Short climbers, let me talk to you. So as a boulderer myself who's 5'6", I quite often come up against moves that are vertically or horizontally challenging. So I thought it'd be worth doing a video on tips for shorter climbers. These tips are definitely in no particular order, and I'm not saying that any one is more important than the others. So the first caveat that I'll make is that a lot of times being a short climber is actually an advantage on many boulders. Often just as many boulders as it's a disadvantage on. You won't always notice the fact that being short is really useful, but you will usually notice straight away that being short is a disadvantage on a particular boulder. So tip number one would be train being short a bit like you would train a weakness. Being short on so many moves, you'll be struggling for vertical reach, you'll be struggling for horizontal reach. So in that sense, it straight away makes a lot of sense to train yourself in extended positions vertically, extended positions horizontally. So if you can start to put a focus in your training on climbing in these really extended positions vertically and extended positions horizontally, you're training your body much more specifically for what you're going to experience on rock. So what does that look like? For me, that looks like setting myself boulder problems where the feet are super low and I have to almost be at full range of extension when doing moves either on my board or on other climbs that I'll climb indoors. If you're not setting boulders for yourself, then use boulders in the gym and force yourself to climb them in really extended positions. Ask yourself, what's the lowest feat here that I can use to climb these moves? I noticed a massive difference in my climbing when I started to actually force myself into more uncomfortable and awkward positions that a lot of times I was actually being forced to be in on rock. And the best way you can kind of bring that uncomfortable into comfortable is to really train yourself in that way regularly and consistently. Tip number two would be to stop making excuses. Now, I'll hold my hand up straight away that many times I've actually been to boulder problems, made an excuse and said, I can't reach between those holes, or I can't reach that foot, or I can't reach that hand from this foot. And later been proved wrong and realized that actually I was too weak. I didn't have the requisite tension or the requisite power or whatever it was that I needed to be able to actually do that move. Sometimes I just needed the mindset. I just needed to actually be willing to persevere and try that little bit more in order to make a sequence work. If you're constantly using your height or reach as an excuse, what you eventually start doing is limiting your climbing and kind of really shrinking the number of climbs that you're willing to try and that you're able to try. I've found over the years I've started to be able to go back to these nemesis problems that I thought I couldn't reach holds on, or I thought I wouldn't be able to keep my feet on moves on, and returning to them stronger and more willing and more open to actually try the sequences again. I was able to do them. A really good example for me of that was Vecchio Leone in Brione, Switzerland, where I tried it quite a few times over the years and almost roped off that I'd be able to keep my foot on the crux. And after a bunch of training on this steep board and focusing a lot more on tension and body strength, I was able to do the move and keep my foot on. I think it's important, even if you feel like at a particular point you're not able to keep your feet on or you're not able to reach a move, don't write it off for the future. Definitely think, okay, what can I do to train myself to be able to come back and do this boulder in this way? The next tip is kind of similar, which is essentially to not write things off too quickly. It is really easy to have a few goes on a reachy boulder, realize how low the foot is and that your foot can't reach, and just stop trying the boulder and try something else. I've definitely been guilty of this quite a few times and walked away from things that I really shouldn't have walked away from. If you write things off too quickly, you really don't give yourself the opportunity to improve on rock, and you really don't give yourself the opportunity to work on the things that you've actually done in training on the rock. I think it's a lot of the time it's easier to persevere with a reachy boulder that you're really motivated to do, but it's a lot harder to persevere through a boulder that you're really not that bothered about. I really try and focus here on those boulders that I'm not as motivated for, to put forth a little bit more effort, because what I realize is that A, it's really good training, and B, if I don't persevere through those boulders that I don't care about as much, suddenly when I come to the boulders that I really do want to persevere with and I do care about, it's much harder. It's a much harder starting point then to get going. The next tip is to be really practical when you're trying a boulder. It's easy to very quickly say, I can't reach that foot, or I can't reach between that hand and that foot. Try it. Be sure that that's the case. This is something that I've done quite a few times over the years, where I've said, I don't think I can reach that foothold from this hand. And all I had to do was actually get pushed into the position, or stack pads to get into the position, or use a ladder to actually find out that I was able to reach in between the 2 points. And this is something that I encourage a lot of the climbers that I work with to do, especially kids. And that's to find out really what your range is between a handhold and a foothold, or 2 handholds out to the side. The more you practice finding out what that range is and what you're capable of reaching, the more confidence you have in actually just eyeballing it straight away. These days I've become much better at actually working out straight away whether I can reach between a hand and a foot or not. But I've only gained that skill over the years by being practical and actually going through the process of testing whether I can reach. A lot of the time, yes, it is impractical and you need a push, or you need a spot, or you need a ladder, or whatever it is. But the more you put yourself in the situation of finding out whether you can reach between holds or not, the better you will get at eyeballing it, and the quicker you'll actually work out what sequences as well are going to be more suitable to you. In that, if I know I'm so extended on a particular hand and a foot that I can't even push straight down through my foot anymore, that I'm on the very tip of my toe and the toe's likely to roll off, then I know, okay, maybe I need a different sequence. But the sooner I can find that out when trying a boulder, the better my chances are going to be at working that boulder out and finding a sequence quickly. Okay, the next tip kind of leads on from that, which is to really scour the rock as much as you can. Obviously, as a shorter climber, a lot of the time you may just not be able to reach between 2 handholds, or a foothold and a handhold. So scouring the rock and looking for different options for feet or different options for hands is so important as a shorter climber. Again, if we're generalizing in that shorter climbers are generally a little bit lighter, often they're able to hold on to smaller handholds. So with that said, it often makes sense to try and find some smaller handholds around that oftentimes won't actually have been chalked or used by anyone else. Another benefit here is that scouring the rock in this way and using smaller handholds and smaller footholds will ultimately just make you a lot better at using both. The next tip would be to focus on hip mobility. So as a shorter climber, a lot of the time you'll end up unable to reach really low feet. So a lot of the time you're going for really high feet. In those situations, being able to get your foot really high on a foothold and then open your hips up to get as close to the wall as you possibly can is vital in actually doing those moves. It's not actually that much use being able to stand on a high foothold if your arse is a country mile out from the wall and you can't actually get your hips in close enough to be able to reach to the next move. So I try and keep a real focus in my climbing on being really mobile in the hips. It's also worth saying that being mobile just in general in every muscle group in the lower body is very useful as a shorter climber, in that the amount of holds you can reach as a shorter climber, whether they're out to the side or low or high, is really important to actually being able to access as many holds as possible and give yourself as many options as possible on a boulder. If you're super mobile in the hips, but you're not as mobile in the hamstrings, a lot of the time it's hard to even get that foot on in the first place, let alone get your hips then over it. If you're not particularly mobile in the adductors, again, getting your feet out wide to the sides, or especially if you have to use 2 feet quite wide apart, is going to be difficult. So certainly being as mobile and as flexible as you can as a shorter climber is super useful. And the last tip is probably pretty counter to one of the earlier tips, but that is to actually just know when to walk away. Sometimes, especially on a trip or when trying a particular boulder, you've exhausted all your possible options and you've realized that that boulder is either going to be 5 grades harder or impossible for you. They are out there. Like, there's not that many, but they are out there. In those situations, be prepared to say, this isn't for me, I'm not able to do this. It would require too much of an investment that I'm not willing to put into it. Walk away, try something else. And those are definitely, I think, the most important things to consider when being a shorter climber. There are definitely more things that are useful that I've found over the years. Maybe they're for another video. If you've got any questions about anything that I've mentioned in this one or anything that relates to being a shorter climber, it would be cool to hear. Otherwise, see you on the next one.